My name is Captain Elsie Henson, and at 29 years old, I've served my country on 2 different battlefields. I thought I understood betrayal. But the cruelest betrayal didn't come from an enemy combatant. It came from my own father, in his lavish, wood-paneled study. With a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, he delivered his verdict. Your mother and I have made a decision. You're being written out of the will. My mother, Patricia, added, her voice as sweet as honey and as venomous as a snake's. We can't keep watching you play soldier and waste your time on that little computer project. Your brother, Jake, is about to make partner. That is a legacy. My father scoffed. What do you have? A laptop and a fantasy. Your brother has the world. They didn't know that hidden in my jacket pocket was a letter bearing the seal of the Pentagon. A letter that could change everything. If you have ever had your dedication dismissed by your own family, your passion called a game, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, because this is the story of building a legacy no one can ever take away. The air in my father's study was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive scotch, and silent judgment. I stood at parade rest, my back straight, my posture a discipline drilled into me at West Point. It was a position of respect, but in this room, it felt like the stance of a defendant awaiting sentencing. My father, Harold Henson, didn't look at me. His attention was fixed on the amber liquid he swirled in a heavy crystal glass. My mother, Patricia, sat in a wingback chair, examining her flawless manicure as if it were the most pressing matter in the world. They hadn't summoned me here for a conversation. They'd summoned me for a verdict. We've been talking, Elsie, my father began, his voice the low, confident rumble of a man who had never been told no. The ice clinked in his glass. About your future, or the lack thereof. I held my ground. My future is quite clear, Dad. Aegis Logistics is gaining traction. The system's predictive analytics could revolutionize military supply chains. It could save lives. Enough. The word cut through the air like a whip crack. He finally looked up, his eyes cold and dismissive. The Pentagon gets 100 bright ideas like yours every day. They need steel, engines, real things. He gestured with his glass toward the corner of the room. On a polished mahogany stand sat a scale model of an F-35 fighter jet, a perfect replica of the aircraft his company, Reynolds Defense Dynamics, manufactured. He ran his free hand over its miniature wing with a tenderness he never showed me. This is reality. This is power. You, Elsie, are a footnote. The words were meant to wound, and they did. A dull ache spread through my chest. All my years of service, the deployments, the bronze star that sat in a case in my small apartment near Fort Belvoir, all of it reduced to a footnote. My mother set her teacup down on its saucer with a delicate clink. The sound was surgically precise, designed to draw my attention. Elsie, darling, she said, her voice a soft, silken weapon. I only want what's best for you. Look at Jake. He's about to close on a house in Great Falls. And you? Still in that cramped rental. What am I supposed to say when people at the country club ask about you? I truly don't know. Am I supposed to tell them my daughter is busy saving the world with a computer program? Each word was a meticulously sharpened needle dipped in the poison of feigned concern. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about her own reflection in the eyes of her wealthy friends. My life, my service, my ambition. It was an inconvenience, a social embarrassment she had to manage. Just then, the heavy oak door swung open. My brother Jake walked in, dressed in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car. He was the golden child, the heir apparent, the one for whom the path had always been cleared and paved. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence beyond a cursory glance before nodding to our parents. My father took a slow sip of his Macallan. Jake, glad you could join us. I was just informing your sister of our decision regarding the estate. Jake's expression didn't change. He simply straightened his tie. I watched him, waiting for a flicker of protest, a sign of solidarity, anything. There was nothing. When my father confirmed I was being removed from the will, that everything would go to him, Jake just shrugged. a slight, almost imperceptible movement of his expensive suit. "It's your decision," he said, his voice neutral, detached. That was it. That was the moment the ground beneath me truly gave way. His silence, his easy acceptance of a fortune built upon my exclusion, was more damning than my father's cruelty or my mother's condescension. It was the final, unspoken confirmation. I was not one of them. I was an outsider in my own family. His betrayal wasn't loud, it was a quiet, contemptuous void. I finally allowed myself to break posture, my training giving way to the crushing weight in the room. I turned to leave, my movements stiff, robotic. I had to get out before the disciplined walls I'd built around my emotions crumbled completely. As I reached the door, my father's voice stopped me one last time, each word a shard of ice. "And I suggest you drop that project of yours. This world has no room for dreamers, Elsie. You don't belong in it." I didn't answer. I walked out of the study, through the grand foyer with its marble floors and soaring ceilings, and out the front door. The cold Virginia air hit me like a physical blow, seeping through my coat and into my bones. It felt like it was trying to freeze the simmering rage inside me. I stood on the manicured stone pathway of the McLean estate, the place I once called home, and looked down at my own hands. The same hands that had assembled signal relays under fire in Afghanistan, their movements steady and sure while chaos erupted around me, were now trembling. Not from fear or from cold, but from the invisible wounds inflicted by my own blood. They had made their legacy clear. Now it was time for me to build mine. Sitting in the driver's seat of my Ford F-150, parked on a quiet street in Arlington, the engine's hum was the only sound breaking the silence. My trembling hands from an hour ago had stilled, but an older, deeper tremor was now working its way up from my soul. My father's words hadn't created a new wound. They had only torn open a scar that had been forming my entire life. The map of my family's favoritism wasn't drawn today. It was etched in stone decades ago. My mind drifted back, unbidden, to 2 graduation ceremonies, starkly different in every way but name. The first was Jake's, from Harvard Law. It wasn't just a graduation, it was a coronation. My parents had chartered a private jet to Boston. The celebration was a lavish affair at the Four Seasons, with champagne flowing and a string quartet playing softly in the background. I remember my father standing to give a toast, his voice booming with pride as he spoke of the Henson dynasty, and how Jake was destined to carry it forward. He was an investment, a legacy in the making. Then there was my graduation from the United States Military Academy at West Point, an achievement born from 4 years of relentless discipline, sacrifice, and grit. My parents drove up from Virginia, arriving late and complaining about the traffic on the Palisades Parkway. They stayed just long enough for a single, stiff photograph. My mother fussed with my formal gray uniform, trying to make it look less severe. My father checked his Rolex, anxious to leave for what he called a critical meeting back in D.C. I remember standing alone on the vast green expanse of the plain, watching the other cadets embraced by their tearful, beaming families. My uniform felt less like a symbol of honor and more like armor, holding together a heart that was quietly breaking apart. In the Henson dynasty, I wasn't a legacy, I was a liability. The memories kept coming, each one a fresh layer of salt on the wound. I remembered Christmas morning when I was 16. I walked downstairs to see Jake, then 18, being handed the keys to a brand new, midnight blue BMW 3 Series parked in the driveway, a comically large red bow on its hood. My gift was a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a certificate for a course on etiquette and the art of negotiation. It was a not-so-subtle message. Jake was being equipped for power. I was being polished for display. When I couldn't hide my disappointment, my mother pulled me aside, her touch gentle, but her words firm. "Jake needs a car to make an impression at his internships, darling," she had explained. "You just need to make an impression with your charm." That was the moment I understood. The paths for us weren't just different, they existed in different universes. Jake's path was a superhighway, paved with money and opportunity. Mine was an unpaved road I was expected to walk gracefully, in heels. Was there ever anyone who saw me differently? The thought brought a familiar ache, a phantom limb of grief for the only ally I ever had in that house, my Uncle Robert. He was my father's younger brother, a Marine who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam. Uncle Robert was a quiet man, with eyes that had seen too much and a handshake that felt like solid oak. He was the only one who didn't laugh when, at 10 years old, I declared I wanted to be a soldier. Instead, he took me into the woods behind their property and taught me how to read a topographic map. He showed me how to tie a bowline knot, telling me it was a knot that would never fail under pressure. "Just like you, Elsie," he'd said with a rare smile. The day my acceptance letter from West Point arrived, he was the first person I wanted to tell. He was in the final stages of his battle with cancer, his voice weak and raspy over the phone. But his spirit was as strong as ever. "Don't ever let anyone tell you the path you chose is wrong, kid," he'd rasped. "Honor is something you earn. It can't be bought and it can't be inherited." He passed away 2 months later. With him went the only unconditional support I had ever known from my family. The silence he left behind was deafening, and it had been ever since. My father had tried to fill that silence with his own plans for me. I recalled the countless dinners where he'd tried to recruit me into Reynolds' defense. He never asked what I wanted to do. He simply told me what I would do. "You have a good mind, Elsie," he'd say, as if offering a generous compliment. "It's a waste to have it serve the government for a pauper's wage. Come home. I'll give you a department to run." To him, my military service wasn't a calling. It was a low-paying job you took when you couldn't get a better one. It was something to be outgrown, like a teenage phase. His love was a form of control. The suffocating ownership of a CEO managing an underperforming asset. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a compliant employee who shared his last name. If you've ever had one person in your life who was your rock, your only true supporter, please hit that like button. And in the comments, just type, "Uncle Robert," if you know what it feels like to lose that one person who truly saw you. Sitting there in my truck, the cold dark of the evening pressing in, the memories settled not as anger, but as a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't a recent betrayal. It was the culmination of a lifetime of them. It was a system, a carefully constructed reality where I was always on the outside looking in. They hadn't just written me out of a will. In their hearts, they had written me off long ago. The question that hung in the silence of my truck was no longer about them. It was about me. They had drawn their map, a world where I had no place. So what now? What if I stopped trying to find my place on their map and started drawing my own? Where in the hell would I even begin? The question of where to begin was answered for me less than 24 hours later. I was back in my F-150, parked outside a coffee shop, trying to work up the energy to face the day when my phone buzzed. It was a missed call from Dominic Gallo, my sole angel investor, and a man whose belief in Aegis Logistics had been a rare beacon of hope. I took a deep breath, the kind a soldier takes before kicking in a door, and called him back. Dominic's usually calm, optimistic voice was strained, tight with an urgency that sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "Elsie, bad news," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Titan Defense Systems just announced an exclusive logistics contract with FEMA. They swooped in and took it right out from under us." My stomach clenched into an icy knot. It wasn't just a contract. It was our lifeline. It was the proof of concept deal that would have put Aegis on the map, the one thing that could have validated my entire struggle. "How, Dominic?" Our presentation was solid. They loved the demo. "I know," he sighed, the frustration palpable even through the phone. "But this wasn't about the tech, Elsie. Titan came in with a bid so low it was practically charity work, and somehow they got the approval process fast-tracked through back channels. This whole thing smells. Back channels. The phrase echoed in my head, triggering an alarm bell I'd ignored for months. My mind flashed to a memory from a suffocating charity gala. My mother, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the senator's wife. I'd overheard her say, "Oh, Harold is just so busy. He's been helping some old friends over at Titan with a new venture." At the time, I dismissed it as idle chatter. Another name drop in a sea of them. Now, it felt like a missing piece of intelligence clicking into place. Dominic's voice pulled me back to the present. It gets worse. The feedback we got, it's like they knew our playbook, Elsie. They had a counter-argument prepared for every single strength of Aegis. It was almost as if they'd read our proposal before we even submitted it. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a business loss. This was a coordinated attack. The vague sense of betrayal I felt from my family was now taking the shape of a meticulously planned military operation. My father wasn't just a bystander. He was a combatant on the other side, but suspicion wasn't proof. As a signals intelligence officer, I knew that better than anyone. I needed confirmation. I have to go, Dominic. I'll call you back, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting inside me. I hung up before he could respond. My mind was already in mission mode, sifting through assets, identifying targets. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over one name, Major Ken Davis, a classmate from West Point, a good man. And most importantly, a man who now worked in procurement at FEMA. He answered on the third ring. Henson, long time no see. What's up? Ken, it's Elsie. I need a favor. Off the record. There was a pause. The shift in my tone was all he needed. Go ahead. The Titan contract, I said, getting straight to the point. It came out of nowhere. I need to know what happened. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. He let out a long, slow breath. Look, Elsie, this is not official. You did not hear this from me, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The decision came from way upstairs. There was a sudden, unscheduled meeting between our director and a heavy-hitter lobbyist from K Street. The guy who arranged the whole damn thing. Elsie, it was your father, Harold Henson. The world tilted on its axis. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't just endorse Titan, Ken continued, his voice laced with discomfort. He actively torpedoed you, told them your system was untested and too risky for national security operations. He used his name, his reputation, to paint you as a liability. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the truck window. A gut punch. That's what it was. A direct, calculated blow from the one person who should have been in my corner. He hadn't just refused to help me, he had actively, deliberately, and successfully destroyed my single best opportunity. The pain I'd felt in his study morphed into something else entirely. It became a cold, hard rage, a fury so pure and so focused that it burned away all the hurt, leaving only crystalline certainty in its wake. There were no tears. Tears were a luxury, a release I couldn't afford. In the military, when you're ambushed, you don't grieve, you react. You assess the damage, you find cover, and you return fire. I started the engine of my F-150, the rumble a familiar comfort. I didn't drive home. I drove toward the one place that felt like my own territory, my small rented workspace in a converted warehouse in Arlington. The place smelled of stale coffee and ozone from the servers, a stark contrast to the leather and scotch of my father's study. This was my command post. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue glow on my face. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a renewed sense of purpose. I created a new, encrypted folder on my desktop. I stared at the blank naming field for a moment, the words of the West Point motto echoing in my mind. Duty, honor, country. My father had weaponized his legacy against me. Now, I would build my own. I typed the folder name, Operation Counter-Strike. The war had officially begun. My command post for Operation Counter-Strike was a world away from the polished mahogany and silent judgment of the Henson Mansion. The headquarters of Aegis Logistics was a converted loft in an old Arlington warehouse, a space with exposed brick walls, a chaotic web of orange Ethernet cables snaking across the ceiling, and the persistent, comforting smell of burnt coffee. It wasn't glamorous, it was real, it was home. And it was populated by my squad, my real family. There were 3 of them, the ones who had bet their futures on my little computer project. First, there was Leo, a former Air Force cyber warfare tech, Leo was a coding genius who existed in a uniform of faded band t-shirts. Today it was the Ramones. And a state of perpetual caffeine-fueled intensity. He could make a server do things that defied the laws of physics. Next was Maria, a single mom and our user interface guru. She possessed the rare magic of being able to take my complex, data-heavy algorithms and transform them into something clean, intuitive, and beautiful. She was the calm, steady heart of our operation. And finally, there was Sam, our network engineer. At 23, he was the youngest, a prodigy who looked at complex network architecture the way most people look at a crossword puzzle. To him, I wasn't just his boss. I was the cool older sister he never had. They were already there when I arrived, the glow of their monitors reflecting in their focused eyes. They knew something was wrong. They could read it in the way I carried myself, the same way a unit can sense tension in their commander before a single word is spoken. I called them over to the worn-out couch in the corner. I delivered the news with the same dispassionate tone I'd use in a mission briefing. I told them we'd lost the FEMA contract. I told them Titan Defense had undercut and outmaneuvered us. And then, I told them the hardest part. I told them my father was the one who had orchestrated it. I laid the betrayal bare, not for their pity, but for their clarity. I understand if this changes things, I finished, my voice even. The road ahead just got a lot harder. Our funding is almost gone. There are no paychecks coming. If you want to walk, I get it. No hard feelings. Silence descended on the loft, thick and heavy. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the servers, the lifeblood of our dying dream. My own words hung in the air, a confession of failure. Then Leo, who had been staring at the floor, looked up. His eyes, usually dancing with lines of code, were fiercely loyal. "Captain," he said, using the title he reserved for moments of absolute seriousness. "I've been shot at using equipment a hell of a lot worse than anything Titan has ever built. I'm not going anywhere." Maria nodded, a determined set to her jaw. She pushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "My daughter Sophia calls you the cool boss lady. I can't exactly go home and tell her I quit on you. Besides, where's the fun in an easy fight?" Sam, ever the man of few words, just looked from Leo to Maria, then back to me, a small, unwavering smile on his face. "We're a team," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet washed over me. It was gratitude, fierce and overwhelming. In the sterile, opulent rooms of my childhood home, I had been disowned for my ambition. Here, in this dusty loft, surrounded by these people, I was being embraced for it. Before the weight of the moment could become too heavy, Maria clapped her hands together. "Okay, enough of this. We're not going to sit here and mope. I'm ordering pizza." And just like that, the funeral became a war council. We pooled the cash from our wallets, about $43 in total, and ordered 3 large pizzas from a local joint and a couple 6-packs of beer. We sat on the floor, using empty boxes as plates, surrounded by whiteboards covered in flowcharts and algorithms. The tension of the last 24 hours began to melt away, replaced by the easy camaraderie of people who have been through hell together. Leo told a story about trying to fix a satellite uplink during a sandstorm in Qatar. Maria made us laugh describing her daughter's attempt to code a new game on her iPad. We weren't just colleagues, we were soldiers in the same trench, sharing our rations and finding strength in each other. Looking at their faces, illuminated by the glow of a single desk lamp, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my family. Not the one defined by blood and a last name, but the one forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. And in that circle of trust and greasy pizza boxes, a new strategy began to form. "We were aiming too high," I said, thinking aloud. "FEMA, the Pentagon, they're too big, too political, too easy for someone like my father to influence." Leo took a bite of pepperoni pizza. "So we go smaller, more agile." "Exactly," I said, an idea sparking to life. "We pivot. We go where the need is immediate, where bureaucracy can't keep up. We go to the front lines of a different kind of war. I stood up and walked to the largest whiteboard, picking up a dry erase marker. We're going to talk to the California National Guard. They're fighting wildfires year-round. Their logistics are a nightmare. They need us. Later that night, long after the others had gone home, I stood alone by the loft's large window, looking out over the sleeping city. In the distance, the white marble of the Lincoln Memorial was a faint, steady beacon in the dark. I thought of the oath I took as a commissioned officer, the promise to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined the most dangerous domestic enemy I'd face would share my own DNA. That night, I made a new oath, a silent one, just for myself. I would not let Aegis die. I would not let a system that could protect my fellow soldiers, firefighters, and first responders be buried by greed and arrogance. My father had declared war on my dream. Now, he was about to find out what it felt like to fight a soldier who had nothing left to lose. The 3 weeks that followed were a blur of caffeine, code, and cautious optimism. Fueled by pizza and a renewed sense of purpose, my team and I worked around the clock. We retooled Aegis, customizing its algorithms to tackle the chaotic logistics of natural disasters. We ran thousands of simulations, teaching the AI to predict wildfire hotspots based on weather patterns and topographical data, and to optimize the deployment of water, food, and firefighting equipment with ruthless efficiency. Our target was the California National Guard, and we finally landed a video conference with their senior logistics officers. The presentation was flawless. Leo's code ran without a hitch. Maria's interface was so intuitive it felt like magic, and Sam kept the network connection stable as a rock. We weren't just showing them software, we were showing them a lifeline. At the end of the call, Major General Miller, a stern-faced man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, actually cracked a smile. "Captain Henson, this is impressive," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Damn impressive. Give us a few days to review with the Adjutant General. We'll be in touch." When the call ended, a wave of pure, unadulterated hope washed over our tiny office. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe. We had found a new path. We had found a way to win. The feeling was intoxicating. That evening, as I was packing up to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jake. My stomach tightened instantly. "Heard the call with Callie went well. Happy for you," it read. My eyes narrowed. Happy for me. He hadn't spoken to me in months. The text continued. "But seriously, Els, Dad is making a very generous offer. Don't let your pride get in the way. A vice president position isn't something you just walk away from." A wave of nausea rolled over me. It was so perfectly crafted, so insidiously manipulative. The faux concern, the casual use of my nickname, the appeal to be realistic. It wasn't a message of brotherly advice, it was a threat wrapped in a silk bow. It was a clear signal from headquarters. "We know what you're doing. It's futile. Surrender now." They weren't just watching me, they were tracking my every move. The next 3 days were agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. I refreshed my email every 5 minutes, my anxiety a constant, humming current under my skin. The hope that had felt so bright and strong was now flickering, threatened by the encroaching shadows of my family. The email arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. The subject line was neutral. "Regarding your Aegis logistics proposal." My hands were slick with sweat as I opened it. The language was polite, corporate, and utterly devastating. "We were very impressed with your presentation. However, at this time, we have decided to pursue a different direction." It went on, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. A different direction. There was no explanation, no feedback, just a door slammed shut in my face. The silence in the loft was absolute. The hopeful energy of the past few weeks evaporated, leaving a cold, heavy vacuum in its place. I sat there, staring at the screen, for what felt like an hour. The rational part of my brain, the intelligence officer, knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was another coordinated attack. And this time, I didn't have to wait for confirmation. It came that same afternoon, splashed across the homepage of every major defense industry news site. The press release was bombastic, full of triumphant corporate jargon. Titan Defense Systems, in a strategic partnership with Reynolds Defense Dynamics, launches nationwide emergency response logistics initiative. My blood ran cold as I read the next line. The California National Guard has been named as the program's first pilot partner. I felt the air leave my lungs. He hadn't just beaten me to the finish line. He had bought the entire racetrack, rewritten the rules, and then burned the stadium to the ground just to make sure I couldn't compete. My father wasn't just trying to make me fail. He was trying to erase me. He was laying siege to my life, cutting off every possible escape route, ensuring that the only path left was the one that led back to him, defeated and broken. I sat in the dark, my mind a numb wasteland, when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed, Mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some grim, masochistic impulse made me answer. Her voice was sickly sweet, a sound that always set my teeth on edge. Elsie, darling, I was just thinking of you, she cooed. Your father and I would love for you to come to dinner tomorrow night. We have something very important to discuss. Oh, and Bill Peterson, your father's business partner, will be joining us. It will be lovely. I clutched the phone, the cold plastic biting into my palm. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. This was the final act of their campaign. They had systematically destroyed every alternative, isolated me, and starved my resources. Now, the conquering generals were inviting the defeated enemy to the surrender ceremony. They were going to make me their final offer, the one they believed a desperate, cornered animal could never refuse. A strange calm settled over me. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks wasn't hot anymore. It had cooled, hardened, and sharpened into something lethal. They thought they had me trapped. They thought the siege was over. They were wrong. The siege wasn't over. It had just given me a clear view of the battlefield, and I was about to go on the offensive. Of course, Mother, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. I'll be there. I wore a simple black dress to dinner, the kind that signals professionalism, not celebration. As I stepped into the dining room, the scene was exactly as I had pictured, a stage set for a surrender. The long mahogany table was a gleaming battlefield, impeccably arranged with Tiffany silver and Waterford crystal that refracted the light from the chandelier overhead. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and something else, the cloying aroma of self-satisfaction. Bill Peterson, my father's partner, rose to greet me. He was a portly man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his soft edges, with a politician's smile that never reached his eyes. Elsie, wonderful to see you, he boomed, his handshake moist and brief. My mother fluttered around me, complimenting my dress, my hair, anything to fill the suffocating silence with meaningless noise. My father simply nodded from the head of the table, the king observing a subject entering his court. I took my seat. The dinner conversation was a masterclass in calculated boredom. The stock market, the upcoming midterms, a tedious story about a golf game at their exclusive club in Potomac. I remained silent, a ghost at the feast, taking small sips of water. I felt like a prisoner of war, being offered a final meal before the execution of my dreams. I focused on a lesson from West Point strategy class: never fight the enemy on their terrain, by their rules. This dining room was my father's terrain. These were his rules. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to gather intelligence. During a lull in the conversation, my father cleared his throat and leaned back, a smug look on his face. You know, Bill, he said, directing his story to his partner, but his gaze squarely at me. It reminds me of a little startup. A couple of kids with a bright idea who thought they could compete with us on the Osprey contract a few years back. Very passionate, very naive. He chuckled. We acquired their core patent for pennies on the dollar, and they were out of business in 6 months. Peterson laughed, a wheezing, sycophantic sound. My mother smiled politely. The joke, a thinly veiled parable of my own situation, landed and lay dead on the table. It was a power play, a public humiliation designed to remind me of my place. Then, As the main course, a perfectly cooked beef Wellington was served. My father began the main act. He placed his knife and fork down, assuming the air of a benevolent monarch about to bestow a great honor. "Elsie," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I've been watching you. You have persistence, I'll grant you that. But this is a harsh market." He glanced at Peterson, a silent cue. "We've discussed it, and I am prepared to forget this recent unpleasantness. It's time to put that little project of yours to rest. The position of Vice President of Strategy at Reynolds Defense is still available for you." My mother jumped in, her voice brimming with manufactured warmth. "That's right, darling. It's time to come home. We can finally be a family again." Come home. The words were an insult, as if I had been the one who left, the one who had strayed. I said nothing, my face a mask of neutrality. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for the tears, the gratitude, the relief of a broken daughter finally accepting her defeat. Then came the final twist of the knife, delivered by Bill Peterson. He leaned forward, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "Elsie, your father has told me about your vision for predictive logistics. It's impressive, truly. We need a mind like yours on the team," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Especially to help us integrate new technologies, like the ones from Titan, for example." And there it was, the coup de grace, the final, unthinkable term of my surrender. My breath caught in my chest. A white-hot rage, so intense it felt silent, roared to life inside me. They didn't just want me to give up. They didn't just want me to work for them. They wanted me to take the brilliant, beautiful thing I'd built from scratch, the very soul of my professional life, and use it to legitimize and improve the stolen, second-rate product they had used to crush me. They wanted me to personally oversee the autopsy of my own dream, then hand them the organs on a silver platter. They wanted my mind, my compliance, and my soul. If you have ever been in a situation where you had to make a choice between your dignity and keeping the peace, I want you to hit that like button right now. And in the comments, just write the single word, dignity, to let me know you stand with me. Something inside me shifted. The rage didn't boil over. It cooled, crystallizing into something hard and unbreakable. I slowly, deliberately, placed my Tiffany knife and fork down on the plate, the silver making a soft, final sound against the porcelain. I lifted my head and looked at each of them in turn. My father, the architect of my pain. My mother, his willing accomplice. Bill Peterson, the smiling vulture. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I smiled. It was a cold, alien thing, a smile they had never seen on my face before. It held no warmth, no joy, only the chilling calm of absolute resolve. "This is," I said, my voice perfectly even, "a very generous offer. I'll need some time to think about it." I stood up from the table, my movements fluid and controlled. I gave a slight, formal nod. "Thank you for dinner." And I walked away, leaving them sitting in a stunned, confused silence. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, my head held high, out of their house and into the cool night air. Sitting in my truck, the engine off, I didn't feel angry anymore. The fury had burned itself out, leaving behind a state of perfect, diamond-hard clarity. A soldier knows that you cannot win a war by fighting on the enemy's terms. My father thought this dinner was the end of the game. He was wrong. It was the beginning of mine. He had shown me his weapons, money, influence, and ruthless contempt. Now, it was time to show him mine. Clarity is a weapon. In the quiet of my truck after that dinner, I remembered the words of an instructor at Fort Huachuca, the Army's intelligence school. Assume your enemy is lying. Your job is to find the truth they're trying to hide. My father had lied. He had presented himself as an ally to Titan, a mere supporter. It was time to find out the truth. I didn't go back to the loft. I went to my small apartment, and in the space of an hour, I converted my living room into a tactical operations center. My laptop was the command console. A large whiteboard dragged out from my spare bedroom became the intelligence board. Fueled by black coffee and cold fury, I launched Operation Counter-Strike. My first target was the financial link between Reynolds Defense and Titan. This wasn't a job for clandestine methods. It was a matter of public record if you knew where to look. I spent the next several hours deep in the digital labyrinth of the SEC's Edgar database, sifting through quarterly reports, shareholder disclosures, and dense footnote-laden filings. My training in open source intelligence, OSINT, kicked in. I wasn't just reading, I was hunting for anomalies, for patterns hidden in plain sight. And then I found it. It was buried in a Schedule 13D filing from 6 months prior. Reynolds Defense hadn't just made a strategic investment in Titan. They had been quietly acquiring a massive block of Titan's stock through a series of shell corporations. It was enough for a controlling interest. My father wasn't supporting a competitor. He owned the competitor. The FEMA contract, the California contract, he wasn't just clearing the way for an ally. He was engaging in predatory, monopolistic tactics to secure business for his own clandestine acquisition. This was bigger and dirtier than I could have imagined, but it still didn't fully explain his level of risk. Why push so hard, so fast? A hostile takeover was one thing, but torpedoing his own daughter's viable project for a system he'd just acquired seemed reckless. There had to be more. The enemy was lying, but what was the deeper truth? The next phase required me to go dark. I powered up an encrypted laptop and reached out to a few old contacts from my days in the Signal Corps community. Ghosts in the machine who owed me favors. I didn't tell them the whole story. I just told them I needed to see the raw performance data from Titan's new logistics platform. No questions asked. A few hours later, a secure link appeared in my inbox. It led to an unsecured server in Eastern Europe, a digital back alley where leaked corporate and government data was sometimes dumped. And there it was. Gigabytes of raw, unredacted testing reports from Titan's system. As I began to parse the data, a knot of unease formed in my stomach. The public-facing marketing materials from Titan boasted of 99.9% uptime and next-generation predictive accuracy. The raw data told a very different story. The system was plagued with critical failures. It crashed constantly under heavy load. Its predictive models were wildly inaccurate, frequently misidentifying supply needs and delivery routes. And worse, I found a glaring security vulnerability in its core architecture, a backdoor so wide open a novice hacker could drive a truck through it. I worked for 48 hours straight, stopping only to make more coffee. My whiteboard was now covered in a spider web of diagrams and calculations. The picture that emerged was horrifying. The Titan system wasn't just flawed. It wasn't just a piece of bad software. It was dangerous. I ran one of their own leaked simulation scenarios, one designed to test the system's response to a convoy operation in a hostile, mountainous region. In the simulation, a convoy of medical supplies was needed at a forward operating base. Aegis, in my own tests, would have routed the convoy along a longer but more secure highway. The Titan system, using its flawed algorithm, identified a shortcut through a narrow canyon. A canyon that, in the parameters of the wargame, was a designated ambush zone. I stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. The simulation showed the convoy being rerouted directly into the kill box. Red icons, representing casualties, flashed across the screen until the entire convoy was wiped out. On a real battlefield, that shortcut would have been a death sentence for dozens of soldiers. The truth hit me with the force of a physical impact. This was the deeper lie. This was why my father was so desperate. He had spent hundreds of millions acquiring a company, only to discover their flagship product was a catastrophic failure. He wasn't just trying to win a contract. He was trying to dump a lethally defective product onto the U.S. government before anyone discovered the truth. His pride, his reputation, and his money were on the line. And to protect them, he was willing to risk the lives of American soldiers. The fury I felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. It was no longer about family. It was no longer about my career. This was about duty. My duty as an officer to protect the men and women I served alongside. My hands shook as I started to map out a plan. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But how could I get it to the right people without it being buried by my father's influence? As if on cue, An email notification chimed on my laptop. The sound was so out of place in my silent, intense war room that it made me jump. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be spam. The sender's name stopped my heart. From Office of General James Ironclad Miller, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Subject: Discussion regarding Aegis Logistics System. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. The message was brief, formal, and earth-shattering. Captain Henson, your presentation to the California National Guard was brought to my attention through unofficial channels. Your work is of significant interest. Be at the Pentagon for a formal presentation to a Joint Logistics Committee next Tuesday at 900 hours. Details to follow. I read it once, then twice. It wasn't just a door that had opened, it was a damn superhighway. My father had unwittingly pushed my work in front of the one person he couldn't control. I had the weapon. And the universe had just handed me the perfect battlefield. The week leading up to the presentation was the most intense of my life. My team and I practically lived at the loft, refining every data point, stress testing every line of code, and preparing for every conceivable question. We were David, sharpening our slingshot for a battle against Goliath. On the morning of the presentation, I put on my Army service uniform. As I polished the brass on my belt and adjusted the ribbons on my chest, I felt a calm settle over me. This wasn't just a uniform, it was my armor. It represented a different kind of legacy, one built on merit, not inheritance. Walking down the long, sterile corridors of the Pentagon, I passed a portrait of General George C. Marshall. I remembered a quote of his I'd read at West Point: "The only way to get a thing done is to love it." And I loved Aegis. I loved what it could do, who it could protect. That love was my strength. A Marine escort led me to a secure conference room deep within the building. The plaque on the door read simply, "The Tank." This was the highly secured conference room of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a place where the fates of nations were decided. It was not a large room, but the air inside felt heavy with the weight of history and power. Seated around the polished table were a dozen of the sharpest minds in the U.S. military: lieutenant generals, vice admirals, and senior civilian experts in logistics and cybersecurity. At the head of the table sat General James Ironclad Miller himself. His 4-star rank was outshone only by the intensity of his gaze. There would be no sales pitch here, no corporate fluff. These people dealt in facts, in reality. They wanted the truth. "Captain Henson," General Miller said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "The floor is yours." I nodded, took my position at the podium, and began. I didn't start with a story or an anecdote. I started with hard data. "Generals, esteemed colleagues," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Military logistics is a chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. For decades, we have been managing that chain reactively. Today, I'm here to show you how to manage it predictively." For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through Aegis. I didn't use flashy graphics or marketing slogans. I showed them side-by-side simulations. On the left, the current logistics model, bogged down by outdated software and human guesswork. On the right, Aegis. With our current system, a convoy in Afghanistan requires an average of 8.2 hours of planning. Aegis reduces that to 1.5 hours, I explained, clicking to the next slide. Current fuel consumption for land-based transport is 30% higher than it needs to be due to inefficient routing. Aegis cuts that waste. Most importantly, I paused, letting the weight of my next statement sink in. Aegis has demonstrated a 95% success rate in predicting and rerouting around potential supply chain disruptions, IEDs, ambushes, mechanical failures, severe weather, before they happen. The questions came fast and hard, like machine gun fire. A 2-star Air Force general grilled me on data encryption standards. A Navy logistics admiral challenged my fuel consumption models. A civilian cybersecurity expert from DARPA tried to poke holes in my algorithm's architecture. I answered each question calmly, precisely, and without hesitation. This was my terrain now. This was a battle I was trained to fight. I could feel the tide in the room turning. The initial skepticism was being replaced by a grudging respect, then genuine interest. Finally, General Miller leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He silenced the room with a single look. "Captain, this is all very impressive. But we've also reviewed the proposal from Titan Defense. On paper, they promise similar results." This was the moment. The air crackled with tension. The entire room was waiting to see how I would handle the Goliath in the room. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I did not have the evidence of Titan's fatal flaws with me. To present it here would have been an accusation, a breach of protocol. It would have turned me from a presenter into a whistleblower, and that was not my mission. My mission was to prove Aegis's superiority on its own merits. "General," I said respectfully, "I cannot and will not comment on a competitor's system. But I can show you our results from the field." I clicked to the final file in my presentation. It was raw video footage from a recent joint training exercise at Fort Irwin. The video showed a convoy of Humvees making its way across the desert. "In this scenario," I explained, my voice narrating the action, "the convoy's objective is to deliver critical medical supplies. Intel reports a bridge on their primary route has been compromised. The existing command and control system is still processing the report." On the screen, a split view showed the Aegis interface. We watched in real time as my system, analyzing data from a drone overhead and updated intel feeds, flagged the bridge as a high-risk choke point. Before the human commander even had the report in his hands, Aegis had already calculated 3 alternate routes, ranked them by speed and safety, and pushed the optimal choice to the lead vehicle's display. The convoy seamlessly changed course, bypassing the compromised bridge and reaching its objective 37 minutes ahead of schedule. The mission was a success. The supplies were delivered. The lives were, hypothetically, saved. I turned back to the committee, letting the final frame of the video hang in the air. "My system wasn't built in a sterile lab, General," I said, my voice quiet but ringing with conviction. "It was built from the hard-learned, bloody lessons of the battlefield. It was built for the soldiers in that convoy." Absolute silence descended upon the tank. The generals exchanged glances, a flurry of silent communication passing between them. General Miller's eyes bored into mine, searching, assessing. Then, for the first time, the faintest hint of a smile touched the corner of his ironclad mouth. "Captain Henson," he said, his voice resonating with finality. "Get your team ready. We're green-lighting a pilot program, effective immediately." The words hit me with the force of a shockwave. It wasn't just a contract. It was validation. It was vindication. It was the highest authority in my world looking at me and saying, "We see you. We believe in you." All the dismissal, the scorn, the years of being told I was a footnote, all of it was vaporized in that single, powerful moment of recognition. As I walked out of the Pentagon and into the bright Virginia sun, I felt light enough to fly. The war for respect was over. But I knew, with a cold certainty, that the war for survival was about to begin. The feeling of victory was short-lived. I was driving back from the Pentagon, the adrenaline from the presentation still singing in my veins, when a high-priority alert flashed on my phone. It was from our own system, a Level 1 security breach. My heart hammered against my ribs, but panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. This was the counterattack. I knew it was coming. My father, having lost the battle on the legitimate field of play, was now resorting to sabotage. A sophisticated cyber attack was attempting a brute force entry into the core algorithm of Aegis, trying to steal or corrupt the source code. They were trying to destroy my work from the inside out. I didn't panic. I had anticipated this. We had war-gamed this exact scenario. I pulled over, my hands steady on the wheel, and called Leo. "They're in," I said, my voice calm. "I see 'em, Captain," he replied, his voice tight but controlled. "They're good. But we're better." "Activate Protocol Dawn," I ordered. "Copy that. Activating Dawn." Protocol Dawn was our secret weapon, our digital tripwire. With a single command, Leo isolated our core systems, instantly backing up the true Aegis algorithm to a secure, off-site cloud server. Simultaneously, The protocol shunted the attackers into a quarantined sandbox environment, a digital dead end. And it fed them exactly what they were looking for: a decoy. A deliberately flawed, older version of our code, riddled with bugs and inefficiencies. My father, in his final, desperate act of theft, was about to steal garbage. The trap was set. The next morning, the world exploded. The first piece of news broke just after the stock market opened. The Department of Defense issued a formal press release announcing a large-scale pilot program with a little-known startup called Aegis Logistics. It praised the system as a quantum leap forward in operational efficiency and soldier safety. My phone started ringing off the hook with calls from reporters and venture capitalists. We were no longer a footnote. We were the front-page story. But that was just the opening salvo. A few hours later, the Washington Post dropped the real bomb. A veteran investigative reporter, a man known for taking down corrupt politicians and defense contractors, published a sprawling, meticulously documented exposé. The headline was devastating. Titan's Trojan Horse: How a Defense Giant Sold the Pentagon a Flawed System. The article was a masterpiece of journalism. Citing leaked internal documents, which I had anonymously provided to the reporter weeks earlier, it laid bare the entire conspiracy. It detailed Titan's fraudulent testing data, the catastrophic security flaws, and the system's lethal potential. And, in the final, damning paragraphs, it detailed the role of Harold Henson, CEO of Reynolds Defense Dynamics, in aggressively lobbying for a dangerous product while simultaneously acquiring the company that made it. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. It was a financial firestorm. Wall Street reacted with brutal swiftness. The stock of Titan Defense Systems went into freefall. Trading was halted twice. By the end of the day, it had lost 80% of its value, effectively wiping the company off the map. Reynolds Defense Dynamics, inextricably linked to the fraud, was dragged down with it. Its stock cratered, losing over half its value in a matter of hours. By evening, the political firestorm began. Senators on the Armed Services Committee were calling for immediate congressional hearings. The SEC announced a formal investigation into market manipulation. The empire that Harold Henson had spent a lifetime building, the legacy he valued more than his own daughter, was crumbling into ash. The fire he had started to burn me down had turned back on him, consuming everything he held dear. I was at the loft with my team, watching the news unfold on a large monitor, when my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in a long time: Mother. I let it ring for a moment, the sound an alien intrusion into our quiet celebration. Finally, I answered and put it on speaker. Her voice was almost unrecognizable. The haughty, controlled tone was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged panic. Sobs tore through her words. "Elsie? Oh God, Elsie, what have you done?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Your father, the company, everything. It's all gone. We're going to be ruined. You have to do something. Call them. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." I listened in silence as she pleaded, her words a torrent of self-pity and denial. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the truth, just a desperate attempt to put the genie back in the bottle. My team looked at me, their expressions unreadable. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and devoid of malice. It was the voice of pure, unalterable fact. "I didn't do anything, Mother," I said. "I just built a better system." I let that hang in the air for a beat. "The rest," I finished, "is the consequence of Dad's choices." I pressed the red icon on my screen, ending the call before she could reply. There was no triumph in the action, no surge of victorious adrenaline, just a profound, echoing emptiness. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. And all I felt was the hollow silence that follows the final shot. The connection was severed, not just on the phone, but for good. A week after the firestorm, they came. Not to the house in McLean, but to my territory, to the loft. My parents appeared unannounced at the door, and for a moment, I didn't recognize them. They looked like faded photographs of the powerful people they used to be. My father's expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that seemed to have shrunk. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair looked brittle, and her eyes were puffy and red. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out desperation. They stood awkwardly in the middle of our workspace, dwarfed by the whiteboards and humbled by the scent of burnt coffee. My father spoke first, his voice a hoarse rasp I had never heard before. "Elsie," he began, unable to meet my eyes. I know I was wrong. But the company, it's all I have. It's my whole life." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Please, talk to General Miller, use your influence, tell them there's been a mistake, you can save it." My mother began to cry, not the performative tears I was used to, but the ragged, ugly sobs of true despair. "Think of the family, Elsie, please." I looked at these two strangers, the authors of my deepest wounds, and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not anger, not even the satisfaction of victory. Just a quiet, distant pity. They weren't monsters. They were just small, frightened people who had lost their way, blinded by pride and greed. I drew a steadying breath. "I have forgiven you," I said, my voice soft but firm. The words surprised even myself, but I knew they were true. I forgave you for me, not for you, so I could be free of the weight. I paused, letting them absorb that before I drew the final, necessary boundary. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I looked directly at my father. "You taught me that this is a world where the strong survive and the weak are left behind. You chose your path, Dad, and I've chosen mine. I will not use the legacy I am building to save one that was built on lies." I walked them to the door, my movements calm and deliberate. It wasn't an act of cruelty, but an act of finality. It was the last time I ever spoke to them. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth and creation. Aegis Logistics exploded. The pilot program with the DoD was a resounding success, and contracts began pouring in. We moved out of the dusty loft and into a sleek, modern office in Crystal City with glass walls and a view of the Potomac. But we brought the culture of the loft with us. We still had pizza on Fridays, and Leo still wore his faded band t-shirts under his new company fleece. Our family was growing, but it was still our family. With our first major profits, I knew exactly what I had to do. I established a nonprofit foundation. I named it after the one man in my family who had truly believed in me, who had taught me the meaning of a legacy that couldn't be bought. At the launch event for the Robert Henson Foundation, our new office was packed. My team was there, along with General Miller and a crowd of young, bright-eyed veterans, all entrepreneurs in the tech space, all hoping to be the first recipients of our grants. I stood at a podium, looking out at the faces of my real family and my new mission. "A legacy isn't measured by the dollars in a bank account or the name on a building," I said. "It's measured in the lives you touch, in the potential you unlock in others." My uncle, a Marine, taught me that honor is earned. Today, we want to give others the chance to earn theirs. I looked over at Leo, Maria, and Sam, who were watching me with proud smiles. This is our legacy. The story ends, but my life began, a year later. I am standing on the balcony of my office, a warm breeze drifting in from the river. I am a respected name in the defense technology world now, a captain on reserve status, and a CEO. My phone buzzes. It's a call from a young Marine veteran, one of our foundation's first grantees. He's excitedly telling me about a breakthrough in his drone navigation software. I listen, offering advice, my heart filled with a quiet, profound sense of fulfillment. This is what it's all about. This is the work that matters. After the call, I walk back to my desk. I open the bottom drawer and pull out an old, framed photograph. It's the one from my West Point graduation, a stiff, awkward picture of a young woman in a gray uniform standing next to two people who happen to be her parents. For years, looking at this photo brought a sharp, familiar sting of pain and loneliness. But now, as I look at the face of that young, determined cadet, I feel no pain. I just feel a gentle sense of peace. I feel pride for her, for the impossible journey she was about to embark upon. I didn't inherit a legacy of wealth and power. Instead, they gave me a different gift, an accidental one. They gave me a fire. They gave me a fight. They forced me to build my own damn legacy from the ground up, one built on integrity, honor, and a family forged in loyalty. And that is worth more than anything they could have ever left me in a will. Thank you for listening to my journey. The most important lesson I learned is that a true legacy is never inherited. It's forged in the fires of your own challenges and built with your own two hands. Your value is not determined by the family you were born into, but by the one you choose to build and the honor you choose to live by. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of forging your own path, then I invite you to become part of this community. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because your story and stories like ours deserve to be heard. I'll see you in the next one.